Good morning, everybody. How are you today? I hope you've been enjoying so far after Mike's and David's talks. Yes? Okay, so I'll give you a very short introduction of myself, and I would really appreciate if you hold all your questions in the end, if this is okay. Unless you know you can't hold yourself, so you can interject at any moment. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about unleashing leadership within the context of Kanban. I'm going to put, provocations here and there, and I would like, to push, things to extreme just to make a point. So my name is Lazaro Wolf. I'm a management consultant and agile coach. So before we start, first of all, let's talk about how leadership is perceived today. And I think we are really hardwired. We are particularly inclined to think about leadership in its personified version. So bold leaders, prominent personalities, either in business or political terms. So we have people in mind such as Sir Richard Branson, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs of the world, and in the realms of politics, probably Barack Obama, Nelson Mandela. Or, just to avoid a disagreement here, you can put your political idols there, just to avoid, any issues. So somehow we have silently accepted that every time we talk about leadership, we talk about individuals who are essentially in charge. And I don't think we can deny that. And I think we should give credit to the agile community that terms such as servant leader or self-organizing team, came into prominence, and we have more or less fully embraced. So nonetheless, how about start thinking about leadership as a distinctive strategic asset, as a separate component in a system of so many interconnected components and subsystems? What about starting treating it as a very definite asset? So we all saw that leaders, either in politics or in business, they kept failing us, and they will still fail us in the future. These are, some cases that are blatant systemic failures, such as the banking crisis 2008, or much more recent, the German wings crash in the French Alps that shocked the world. These are definitely systemic failures. So someone would ask, what is the alternative? What can we do better? And here's where Kanban steps in and tries to rectify this sort of imbalance on focusing either between the individual or the organization by visualizing our system, by visualizing our workflow, by creating a pull-based rationale in our day-to-day work. However, I would argue, is it an either-or conjunction here? Is it either focusing on the individual or the organization? Well, I don't think we can form a company without people, and I don't think we can form a company without an organization. For example, how could we possibly have a fish tank without fish? How could we possibly have fish, live fish, without fish tank, unless we are referring to the fishmonger's counter with so many dead fish, also known as overworked, burnt out, and demoralized employees that used to be an asset for our company. We keep forgetting that, but at the moment they've become a liability. So speaking of fish tanks, I think fish tank is our new metaphor for the organization, a component really based approach to what the organization, what the company symbolizes, with different components. More importantly, fish, employees, you can see development manager and the tester. Probably larger fish are the CEO and the CTO, arguable that. But I suppose it is a component-based system because we are talking about the glass walls, we're talking about the filters, the pumps, the lighting, and also there's something else there, which is all this in between, water, a very significant component. So fish tanks have immense power. They are sort of the elephants in the room. We visit an aquarium, we go to a fish tank into a home. We never talk about them, about the fish tank and about the immense power, the weight of the water. So fish tanks, once we go to the shop, you buy them, you bring them back home, you put all the components together, including the fish, you start pouring water, and immediately they become unmovable. So the fish tank, its immense power, needs to be recognized, is definitely a beast that needs to be tamed and to be managed with a lot of TLC. So as outsiders, we visit the aquarium, we visit the fish tank, and we are naturally drawn into the beauty of the fish. But what about the most fundamental component, which is the water, the one that gives the fish and our organization, essentially organizational life? However, the quality of the water can be very low. It could be cloudy, it could be muddy. The levels of bacteria can be very high. It might even contain fish droppings. So we need us as consultants or as a part of the system to be very careful, to inspect constantly and take care of its cleaning. So the questions that systemic leadership puts forward, and the perspective is almost opposite, but you will see later on how intertwined the two questions they are, is first of all how the organization can deliver more leadership as capability, as function, not personified as leaders, appropriate for its future. And the other perspective is how can leadership as people and function can support the organization appropriately for its future. So every organization, either consciously or unconsciously, defines the impact and the nature of the leadership delivered. As an organization is essentially in the driver's seat, it reaches the leadership destination that it deserves, not necessarily the one that it needs. So the organization there is where leadership capability exists. Now, without exemption, every company that exercises a sort of leadership activity, it faces gaps where leadership disappears. However, don't be alarmed. Gaps are a vital, an essential, a fundamental component in our systems thinking view, and they could both have positive or negative impact. So gaps can start as little as cracks. They can go as large as canyons and chasms, if left unmanaged particularly, and they can affect how the organization behaves. They can affect the organization's well-being, and they can expose systemic failure and systemic weaknesses. Now, some gaps are very healthy, very vital, containing opportunities, and these are called spaces. And here again, Kanban steps in and introduces the service orientation approach of service providers and service consumers with a fine line in between. Maybe that's the line on Trello or on your physical board that moves something from doing to done. And these interfaces, these points of contact, they are opportunities. They can become excellent communication and collaboration platforms, especially when people join in with goodwill, with trust, with a collaboration appetite. They create synergies, and they can unleash their creativity and their innovation. Although we should be particularly careful that these gaps, there could be personal feuds. There could be sources of hostility and sources of dissatisfaction, especially when the service provider and the service consumer report to a different head of department with a personal agenda that is not aligned to the organizational needs. So most organizational pathogens are identified in spaces, in gaps, either because we were not able to identify these gaps and take some systemic measures, or because we neglected to find the positive spaces and capitalize on them. So some leadership gaps are more evident than others, and I'm sure that in your organization you have identified some of these. For instance, leadership aspirations versus current organizational reality. And this is the unrealistic leadership approach. Leadership aspirations versus current organizational capacity to respond, lack of capacity, etc., etc. But let's have a look some that are not that evident. What about the legitimate system, the one you have on your screen or the one you have on your board, the one that you recognize? And what about the underlying shadow system, which could be politics for a better word? We'll see how it develops a little bit later. What about what the organization knows that it doesn't know, which is an excellent learning opportunity? However, what about what the organization doesn't know that doesn't know, which might be really a blind spot? Or even worse, what about a leader that has a very specific rhetoric claiming high personal and business values, whereas their talks below the parapet, behind the closed doors, behind the closed microphones is completely different? And this is something that the system, and in the analogy of the fish tank, the fish can relate to, and is something that they don't really like. So, yes, Kanban owns all these mechanisms to tackle demand and supply issues, create this pull-based mentality and foster communication and collaboration. However, we need to take into account some undercurrents. We're a fish tank, we need to know some undercurrents, some waves there. So speaking of undercurrents, every organization has a rather complex network of leadership nodes, and the leadership nodes are every individual of you here. Every individual can exercise a form of leadership. However, the more individuals we concentrate, we can have power centers, and some power centers are closer to the others. However, you see again, the system has some marginalization, maybe because of distribution or because certain people are outside the political system. In any network, we do have functional, less functional, and utterly dysfunctional areas. And these areas is where leadership is wasted. So again, going back to the personified version of leadership, what is the knee-jerk reaction of any organization to increase leadership capacity? They just hire more leaders. They go out and they say, okay, I need project managers, program managers, any sort of leadership stock, let's hire them. However, they find very, very quickly that their leadership, they can't really develop massive leadership capability. Why? Because we have the gaps and leadership is wasted. So how can we improve leadership capability? I think we need to stop the waste first. And I quote Taichi Ono here, if the capacity of the system is the work and its waste, the way to improve capacity is to get rid of the waste. The waste is caused by the regime. So we can find leadership waste in its application, in its development, and also in its potential. So we've borrowed here Taichi Ono's 7 or 8 sources of waste, and we present a new model with a leadership twist. Again, the category sources are exactly the same. So the mnemonic is downtime, defects, overproduction, waiting, non-used employee talent, transporting, inventory movement, and excessive processing. And you will see a lot of letters in the following slides. I would like to give you the URL just in a moment. The point of this model is really to give you this leadership twist with an interpretation within the leadership context and with just some examples to function not as an exhaustive list, but just for you as pointers, as inspiration, if you like. So let's start. Defects. We are talking about failure to meet specification. How about our imbalanced effort on putting the change management process right, rather inspecting the right results? Some examples here are favoritism, premature promotion, bug in stern, which is very often met in the public service, so promotion based on the length of service. What about the Peters principle, that our current success doesn't really secure future success? If these are not defects, what are these? Overproduction, developing too many leaders, essentially pushing too many people into leadership training courses that are misaligned to our organizational goals. Waiting for committee decisions. Non-used employee talent, nepotism versus meritocracy, putting our cousin in a particular position that another person deserves. Transporting excessive traveling cost, or inappropriate means to disseminate leadership messages, sending an email to all the organization. How effective this is going to be. Inventory. Not very people-friendly interpretation, I must admit, but again, stock mismanagement, unsuitable stock, appropriate stock levels. So you'll probably be familiar with this, non-instant availability. What about available competencies not suitable for market needs? We need to rectify these things in order to have a very balanced leadership system. So this is the URL if you want to have a look at this list. Again, it's not exhaustive. So the URL is j.mp/leadership waste. So how to remedy leadership waste? What is the best approach? And I suppose that if I give you maybe 30, 40 pointers, 30, 40 examples, probably there are tons of solutions in strategic leadership or a management bibliography for how to tackle these issues. But I think one unique way to approach this is the thermostat approach or the remedial cycle. The first thing we need to do is to understand the deficiency of the system, understand what the problem is, then identify a variety of different solutions and apply forced field analysis. And this forced field analysis has to be very relevant to our system. Our system consists of interdependent components, and these are connected with certain forces. We need to find the restraining forces, and we need to find the enabling forces. Restraining forces are those that really keep the gap open. So when we pour leadership water, that disappears. And also, we need to identify the enabling, the forcing forces for change. How can we bring change? We can either destabilize or weaken the restraining status quo forces and or strengthen the forces for change. Essentially what we achieve, or what's the ultimate goal, is to have customers, leaders, managers, employees that can pull what they need from the organization without friction or barriers. Wasted effort can rigorously stripped out, and critically, the capacity of the system increases. So just say no to another training program that is pushed by an external provider. Instead, try to place the training provider within your organization, make it a part of your strategy. Maybe adjust the course and make it more relevant to the organizational needs. And this is how we convert a very push approach to a pull approach. I think we diverged massively, the people and the organization. And it is time to converge again. The first thing we need to do is really to ensure that leaders, every single one of us, understand what the organization needs at all levels. The other is to ensure that the organization tells us exactly what it needs from us, from leadership. We can't really just go out and do whatever we think is good for the company. So these two need to converge. Let's talk about empowerment. So the way each system is designed, or the way it operates, whether its psyche or emotives essentially are in favor or against our business model, because our organization is there to serve the business model, might have a positive, facilitative, or a negative, inhibiting, destructive influence. It's a little bit like yin and yang. So while the systems cannot be developed to lead per se, so the systems are everything else that we talk about, apart from the systems their own, their influence could be steered to the right direction, and they could be very supportive to individual and collective leadership. They could as well be developed to be less vulnerable to systemic weakness and failure. So while the organization sort of influence or power corrupts, so does its complete absence. Because power is not necessarily a negative thing, it's not a negative asset, it could be very positive. It is necessary to get things done. It's very necessary to instill a continuous improvement and a Kaizen culture in our environment. And we can't do that if we don't have power. So let's talk about power and empowerment. And I think that empowerment is a misunderstood word. It is said that essentially organizations that make a lot of noise about empowerment generally lack it, and they've been spending too much of their own past disempowering everybody. So I would say that we don't really need empowerment development programs or empowerment initiatives in order to reach empowerment. All we need is to stop disempowering the entire system. So empowerment is really a new mindset. It is a new frame of mind, very cool one, I suppose, based on that picture. So a frame of mind which makes means end. A frame of mind that connects everybody, and the real empowerment means that we have reached the most natural state of the system with real empowerment. It means that people know what they need to do, what they have to do, and they just get on with it. We don't need to put any other measures. However, we assume that we're able to drive change just with leadership, but can we? So quite recently I read this. It says empowerment is a weaker expression of leadership, and to be honest with you, I really humbly disagree with that. I don't think this is the case. I'd say that empowerment and leadership, they are very well connected, but they're just different. Leadership safeguards the company's tomorrow, whereas empowerment makes the most out of individual and collective capacity, and it brings this collective development to its greatest potential. Empowerment can be a very meaningful opportunity, especially in the organizational milieu, in the social context. And the more you go into organizations that are hierarchical, the more you require empowerment in order to drive change. It is one of the fundamental constructs of leadership, especially when we are talking about leadership at all levels. How can we do that without empowerment? So take a view, for example, of the British trade union movement in the 80s, the Thatcher's era. Vibrant leadership, very, very vocal, There was no empowerment. And we know exactly what happened with questionable results. And that led, and that was actually a domino effect, to deflate the trade union movement across the entire Europe. Another thing we disregard is that empowerment essentially is a psychological state as well. It's not about just giving power to people, it's how we feel about being empowered. And this can be divided into 4 measurable dimensions: meaningfulness, competence, self-determination, and impact. Meaningfulness is how we perceive, based on our own individual value system, whether our job brings any purpose, any goal, personal or to the organization. Competence is how we feel, how skillful we feel in order to deliver up to the standards. Self-determination is the autonomy in the initiation and continuation of work behaviors and processes. And impact is again our own perception of the degree to which we can influence any strategic, administrative, and process outcomes. So we're going to create really nice radar charts, get, self-assessment or group assessments, and this could be a very good starting point for roles, responsibilities, structures, any sort of component that you can imagine within the system. And essentially what we need to ask within the context of empowerment and with the system's thinking view is 3 questions. Is the system optimized to foster or inhibit empowerment? How do we feel about it? What is people's actual experience once they take an initiative, they put it into action? How did the system behave? Was it punishing? Did it accept? Did it prohibit? And finally, what is the perception in people's minds? So how do we feel before taking any action? How the system would respond, especially in cases that our action might have a little bit more risk, a little bit more innovation, a little bit more just thinking outside the box. How would the system behave? A fish tank that really lives and breathes empowerment, a fish tank that has empowerment under its skin, understands that the path to empowerment is sort of infinite. The closer you get, the further you are. And all you need is really to understand that the journey to empowerment is ongoing. So what about applying a leadership lens on our existing system? Is it just one system, or is it 2 systems? How many systems are we talking about? So despite our good intentions and interventions, the system has a specific dynamic. And this system behavior is really independent to how us all as individuals behave. And sometimes that kind of behavior could be realized by our own behavior. But who drives that at the end of the day? There are very strong similarities to the family, another system. So families in particular cultures, especially when a family member tries to dishonor them or challenges their integrity, the family goes back and attacks to that member. So systems are vicious, and they try to preserve their status quo with all their power. And remember, the power is immense. So systems tend to suppress anything perceived as a threat. The more dysfunctional the system, the more likely the distortion of trust and dark behavior becomes, including possible illegal activity. And that quote is from John Rennish, the futurist. So as knowledge workers, whether managers or employees, we have a dual role into this new systems thinking approach. First is to manage today operations. So it's our managerial role. And the other is, of course, to introduce change and improvement. And this is more close to our leadership role. Again, all of that, we need to exercise that role through the prism of organizational needs. This is what we support at the end of the day. So in systems terms, we have two parallel systems that govern our roles. And it is very unusual for them to be defined as separate systems unless system number one, which is essentially what we deliver today. And it is the system that Kanban represents. It is the operational system that focuses on us here, what we produce every day. We are concerned with service provision and service consumption, with knowledge discovery opportunities and demand and supply issues. So initially, our Kanban board visualizes how the work is expected to flow and perceived to be actually flowing. So from a systems thinking standpoint, this is a maintenance system, which calls for collective management action as ownership is shared amongst all the team members. Now, system two is the overlapping system that is responsible to secure a better tomorrow. It involves our continuous improvement initiatives, and we try to instill through that system the Kaizen culture in system one and beyond. So system one has two facets, one that is external and another one that is internal. And they're so much intertwined. The external one tries to identify new product opportunities, new changing markets, new business models, changes in the macro environment in general. Now, our internal facet surrounds all the operational components, job descriptions, the interconnections between the two multiple teams, and all the organizational structures for collaboration communication. Now, both facets are concerned with what we know and also what we don't know. So all the knowledge discovery activities take place there. So what about another system? System number three. So this is responsible for managing change and, most importantly, hold accountable the individuals and the groups that take part of that change. So everybody of us that essentially exercise leadership, regardless of our job title, of our status, of our position in the hierarchy. So at system 3 level, leadership activities are launched and they are coordinated in a systemic manner, and also collaboration between different functional silos and their communication as well takes place. So according to systems thinking theory, system 3 is a super leadership system. Now you're going to ask me, why is this important? It is important because it instills from a systems thinking and leadership perspective a pull mechanism. So especially in large organizations where flatter structures are not very frequent and top executives act at this level as, opinionated individuals, I must admit, this comes in and instills the following. It is a pull-based leadership model that pulls change upwards. It coordinates all the change effort across multiple system 1 and 2. It is a coordinated effort where it empowers all the people involved to identify deficiencies, identify issues, identify potential solutions, and then all collectively, through the prism of organizational needs, we pull what we need. So that way, we waste leadership units or leadership effort much, much less. So we try to shift away here from a commander-in-chief type of leader, or a sort of prime ministerial behavior. As top executives, whether they are senior project managers or program managers or what have you, they act in absolute collaboration and harmony with their peers and various stakeholders within all the system and outside the system. So ultimately, they become excellent facilitators and they achieve consensus. And this is how systemic leadership is at work. Now, we must admit here that we all have our darker side. So in the context of the organization, this is system number 4, and this is the shadow system. The shadow system overlaps systems 1, 2, 3, and 4. Sorry, 1, 2, 3. 4 is the shadow system. And we had the impression that organizations are really rational places, that decisions are made in a very tactical and rational manner. This is what we are taught when we go to business schools. But is it the case? Is everything based on logic, action, reaction, and focus? I don't think that's the point. I don't think that's the case. So sometimes in order to see the shadow of the organization, we need either night vision or X-rays. So this is the informal shadow system that can be identified everywhere. And it definitely complements the more formal systems. So our darker side definitely helps us understand the collective personality. So we are shifting away from the individual and we go to collective personality and behavior in organizations. And some of the deepest roots of dysfunction are located very deep in the organizational psyche. We start treating the organization as an individual. So the shadow system is well below the public persona. So all the rational elements have less and less potency, and you will see that the system 4 elements are far more powerful than the logical things. For instance, we have elements such as directives, strategic plans, organization charts, job titles, etc., etc. But how about the non-rational ones? I don't say they are irrational because, for example, you might have friendship. Friendship could be fantastic, could be positive, it could drive synergies, even in areas that there is a difficulty in communication. However, how would you feel if friendship is used for marginalization? We have certain factors, announcement, mission statement, but how about power issues or even turning a blind eye? Don't tell me these are not part of the organization, because they are. Don't tell me we all are saints and we don't have our personal interests and our aspirations. And all these can be found into the shadow of the company. So factors are elements that we can't really control, we can't really measure. There are things like national culture and private agendas. So in the context really of managing change, both systems need to be considered together as a positive balance, really. It's not trying to kill one system and make systems 1, 2, and 3 to prevail. I suppose that they all go in unison. We all have our better sides and our shadow. So what is the conclusion of this? Is that essentially the organization is a beast that needs taming and understanding, a lot of TLC. And what about the shadow? So yes, we all have our darker sides, and we do our best to conceal it, to disguise it. We are asked to go for interviews, and we are presented the best image of the organization, but is it? I think we should just beware of the shadow and be aware of it. The brighter the spotlight, the denser our shadow becomes. So I would say just embrace it. Don't fight it. Be aware of it, even fall in love with it, because you might find some very good leadership opportunities there. It is a part of ourselves after all. Thank you.